Hello and welcome back, future scientists. I'm Mr. K with Mississippi Public Broadcasting, and we're kind of switching things up a little bit. So this whole unit we've been talking about something called the cell cycle and mitosis. We're kind of switching it up today, and we're going to discuss something called asexual reproduction. Okay, this is not something that humans do, but some animals and other organisms do it, and it is very similar to how the cell divides. Okay, so we're talking about asexual reproduction. What is asexual reproduction? It's basically how you can divide with only one parent. Humans, when we make offspring, when we make, sons and daughters, there's two parents involved. But some organisms don't need that. They just need one parent, and that's called asexual reproduction. And this is very similar to some of the things that we've seen in the cell cycle. So let's go ahead and get into it. So asexual reproduction, again, this is producing new organisms with identical heredity as the parent, and it involves only one parent. So this is not how humans reproduce, but some plants and animals do this, okay? So we can make exact replicas of organisms by taking the DNA of the parent and copying it and making an exact clone of the parent, and that's called asexual reproduction. So here are a couple different types of asexual reproduction I'll be discussing today. We have something called fission, we have something called budding, regeneration, and then the last one we'll talk about today is called vegetative propagation. So let's go ahead and hop into it and see what's going on here. Okay, so the first one I wanted to talk about is called fission. Sometimes you'll hear this called binary fission. Okay, what is fission? Well, fission is the opposite of fusion. If you know what fusion is, it's taking two small things and putting them together to make something bigger. Fission is the opposite of that. We're going to take something large, we're going to divide it into two, and we're going to end with something that's smaller than what we started with. So again, this is called binary fission, and usually bacteria are the organisms that undergo binary fission. This is the simplest form of reproduction, okay? It's used by single-celled organisms like bacteria. I like to think binary fission, bacteria, they both start with the letter B. That makes it easy for me to remember what types of organisms do this. What's happening here is that the cell's going to enlarge. It copies its hereditary material. Sometimes that's DNA. Sometimes it's RNA, and then it's going to divide into two identical daughter cells. The daughter cells are typically smaller than the parent cells. So just looking at this picture right here, this is kind of similar to something that we saw with mitosis and cytokinesis. We're starting with one cell, we're copying the DNA, the cytoplasm divides in two, and then we're left with two identical organisms. Now, this kind of has some pros and cons to it. You might be looking at this and this seems really easy and really fast, and it is. Bacterial cells can reproduce at a much quicker rate than humans can, but there are pros and cons to this. So some of the pros are, one, you only need one parent, so that makes it a lot easier. It's also a lot faster. So those are pros, but some cons of this asexual reproduction, this binary fission, is that these two cells are exactly identical to what we started with. And what that means is that there's less variety in the population. And what that means is that one bad accident could wipe out all of these bacteria cells. If you look around the classroom you're in right now, you'll see that unless you've got your identical twin sibling in there, everyone in the room probably looks a little bit different than you. Everybody has pros and cons. That's called variety. And what that means is that it gives us a little bit of resilience. Imagine some sort of new sickness comes out. Well, some people in the room might get it, but some people might just be naturally resistant to it. Maybe you just got lucky, right? Well, bacteria cells undergoing this binary fission, they don't have that luxury. Because they're all clones of the parent cell, that one bad sickness could wipe out an entire colony. Okay, so there are pros and cons. Pros are it's faster, but the cons are there's less variety, and that makes them less resilient to some sort of accident or sickness or something like that. Okay, here's kind of another picture of that binary fission. Note that in number one, we're starting with one big bacteria cell. In number two, you'll see that there's two sets of those squiggly blue lines. That's the DNA, so we've copied the DNA. In number three, those cells starts to get pinched down the middle, And then in the last picture at the bottom, number 4, we're ending with 2 new daughter cells that are exact clones of what we started with. So bacteria cells can do this by themselves. It's very quick, and they can make a lot of copies of themselves through this binary fission. Okay? So that's one type of asexual reproduction. Here's another type of asexual reproduction. It's called budding. This is the process some organisms use this, such as yeast. What will happen here is a small bud will grow and eventually detach from the parent cell when it's big enough, when it's fully developed. The new cell may be smaller than the parent cell. So this is kind of a picture of what's going on. It's not exactly like the binary fission. In binary fission, we were splitting them down the middle. Here, the parent cell is going to start to grow a small segment off of it, and then that'll kind of pinch off, and that little bit that pinched off will become its own cell or its own organism. And again, this is what yeast does. So let's look at a picture here, and I'll kind of talk about it in a little bit more detail. So these are yeast cells, and yeast cells kind of have this circular or oval-like shape to them. But if you look at some of these cells, you'll see that there's like a little knob on them. That's a bud that is starting to grow off of it. Most of them are small. So this is a bud. These are all budding, all these little knobs here. So those are buds that are coming off of the yeast cells. They'll continue to grow and get a little bit bigger, and then when they're fully developed, they'll pinch off. And just like with the binary fission, there's pros and cons to this. It's very quick. We can make a lot of yeast like this. But again, all of these cells are probably exactly identical to each other, so it would be really easy for all of these to be wiped out by something. And so there's always pros and cons. Asexual reproduction is very fast, but it results in individuals that are not unique. So because they're all identical, they're all very susceptible to the same thing. Okay, so that's budding. Let's look at some other forms of regeneration. This one's pretty interesting. It's called regeneration. Okay, some animals do this. Whiptail lizards will do this. Starfish can also do this regeneration. What happens here is that regeneration is the ability of an organism to regenerate lost or damaged body parts. This process may lead to the formation of an entirely new organism. Examples of this is, y'all might know that if you grab a lizard by the tail, sometimes the tail will just snap off. It's a defensive mechanism. You can imagine that a lizard walking around, things that are hunting it like a bird might swoop down and catch a lizard by its tail. Well, if that tail just snaps off, the bird has the lizard's tail, but the lizard got away. And so that lizard can kind of escape. The tail will kind of still wiggle sometimes, which is really weird to see. But that protects the lizard from its predators. It's a defense mechanism. Something a little bit different, starfish, if you take a starfish and cut one of its arms off, you might think that you're hurting that starfish, but what will actually happen is that one arm of the starfish will grow and develop to its an entirely new organism. So starfish, they have a very interesting form of regeneration where each arm of the starfish can become its own organism. It'll just continue to grow. Okay, so this is a form of regeneration. Okay, the last one I wanted to talk about is called vegetative propagation. I know that name is kind of long and confusing, but just look at the first part, vegetative. This is something that plants will do. What happens here, this is a form of asexual reproduction. It occurs in plants in which a new plant grows from a fragment or cutting of the parent plant. And a really good example of this is strawberries. So what happens is, this is a full-fledged strawberry plant right here. But if you ever see a strawberry plant, you'll see these things called runners. And it's just like an extension of the plant that's kind of running on the ground. And then what will happen is that runner will run off a little bit, kind of get away from the parent plant a little bit, and then it'll start to grow its own roots. And this will be an entirely new strawberry plant. Now, these two are different plants, but they are clones of each other because it's just a copy of the parent plant. And so this is something that strawberries will do. If you ever find one strawberry plant, you usually find a lot of strawberry plants in the same area because they'll grow these runners and then just start to develop new strawberries along with it. So these are a couple of different forms of asexual reproduction. It's pretty similar to how the cell cycle works. You copy the DNA, you split it into two, and you're ending with two identical daughter cells. As the parent cell, they're going to all be identical. So thank you all so much for following along. Your teacher has some other assignments for you to practice all this stuff on. Make sure to give it your best effort, and I hope everybody has a great day.